My name is George Krumme, and I was a Bristow boy. Quince Brown was a slightly older Bristow boy who became an ace fighter pilot in World War II before he was shot down and killed over Germany 3 months after D-Day. When I learned that his nephew, Rusty Brown, had a video showing clips of Quince's fighter group, I thought it appropriate that a shortened video be made from it for those of us who have an interest in the history of World War II, with a particular emphasis on Quince's outstanding record. So, here it is.
This is Bob Eby speaking on this January day in 1987. The 16mm film on this videotape was shot in 1943 and 1944 at the Duxford Air Base, located 10 miles south of Cambridge, England. The 78th Fighter Group arrived in England in November of 1942 and flew their first combat mission from Duxford on April 13, 1943. This is Colonel Armand Peterson, the first group commander of the 78th. He served from May 1942 until his loss on a combat mission July 1, 1943. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Dayhuff was the first 82nd Squadron commanding officer who served until August of 1943. This is Colonel Jim Stone, the first 83rd Squadron CO, until promoted to Group Commander in August of 1943. Gene Roberts was first 84th Squadron commanding officer, later Group Exec, and still later Group Commanding Officer of the 364th Fighter Group. Major McVeigh, the Group Intelligence Officer, and his staff are preparing the briefing room map for a combat mission briefing. The Weather Officer is advising the cloud formations and winds to be expected en route to the rendezvousing with the bombers and on the way home. Jake Oberhansley is advising key details of the mission, as he is the group leader for this simulated briefing, which was staged for the benefit of the photographer. The pilots leaving the briefing room are in a somewhat more jovial mood than would be normal for a real briefing. This is the control tower from where all instructions were landings at the Duxford field. Duxford was a grass field which had some advantages and some disadvantages. Only 2 fighter planes could take off together on paved runways. We could take off 8 at a time, which saved precious fuel circling the field waiting to form up after the takeoff. Note the belly tanks for extending the range on this mission. The group leader would fly out for 2.5 minutes and then make a slow wide turn to come back over the field. All 48 planes, plus spares, would be in formation and on course to the target or rendezvous area by the time the lead plane was back to the field. This shows the group formation for climbing out to the combat area, where the flights and squadrons would then spread out to combat formation. This is the first of about 15 minutes of selected 78th Group combat film. Note that the title gives the pilot's name, the squadron, the date, and the target. Note also that the English give the day first and the month second. Thus 30-7 means July 30th. You note the pieces of the German plane flying by. This isn't very clear, but those big objects in the background are our B-17 bombers. The mission of July 30th, 1943 held the record for first in the 78th combat history. It was the first belly tank mission and extended the P-47 range to permit crossing the border of Germany for the first time. Major Gene Roberts shot down 3 German planes to become the first U.S. pilot to get a triple air victory on one mission. Charlie London shot down his 4th and 5th German planes to become the first U.S. ace in the European theater. Jack Price had a total of 5 air victories. We lost our second group commander on this July 30th mission when Lieutenant Colonel Melvin McNichol was shot down on his first mission and became a prisoner of war. Flak in the lower left. The final first on July 30th, 1943 is shown here when Quince Brown dropped down to the deck on his return from escorting the bombers and locomotive to become the first U.S. fighter pilot to shoot up a ground target in the European theater. Lieutenant Colonel Gene Roberts, CO of the 84th, had the 3rd highest number of air victories for the 78th Group with a total of 9. Pete Pompetti was another leader in air victories with 6. He was shot down in early 1944 and was a prisoner of war. Good hits. It's too bad the exposure isn't better. Unfortunately, a lot of the combat film I have was not originals, and some clarity is always lost in making copies, and then more clarity is lost in converting 16 millimeter to video. This is a little better, being able to see the clouds, and this is one of the more clear of the series. John Hockery was the 5th leader in air victories with 7. It's another fairly clear exposure compared to many of them. He's getting good hits. There's pieces of the German plane flying by. This film was used to confirm victories for the pilot. Quince Brown was the leading ace of the 78th with 13 victories before he was lost on a strafing run. Those are good hits for being at greater than 300-yard range. Again, you can see the B-17 bombers in their combat formation in the background. Very good hits for that range. Well, the German pilot has put his wheels down, perhaps to slow down so the American pilot will overrun him. Grant Shirley had 6 air victories before not returning from a combat mission. He's going to get proof positive of a victory, as you'll see the German pilot bail out in a moment. There he is. He's not shooting at the pilot. There's a switch to put the camera on only. Ground strafing was very exciting, but much more hazardous than aerial combat. The higher loss ratio resulted from intense ground fire. Direct hits from ground fire was not too common for fighter planes at high altitudes. Planes lined up in a row, like on this last film and on this one, resulted in heavy losses for the Germans. The 78th Group set the record for the European theater when they destroyed 135 planes on the ground on their mission of April 16, 1945. The 78th flew a total of 450 combat missions from April 13, 1943 to April 25, 1945. The group destroyed 338.5 German planes in the air and 358.5 on the ground for a total of 697 German planes destroyed for a loss of 167 P-47s and P-51s. This is a ratio of 4 German planes lost for 1 U.S. plane lost. A P-47 cost $104,260 in 1943, and today a modern jet fighter costs several $1 million in comparison. The 78th Group flew P-38s in 1942 while in the States and while training for combat in England. Priorities in North Africa in late 1942 resulted in all of our P-38s and all but 15 or 16 pilots being transferred to North Africa. We received P-47s in early January of 1943 and flew them for 2 years when they were replaced by P-51s in early 1945. The 78th was the only group to fly all 3 of the first-line Air Force fighter planes. One of the most spectacular ground strafing explosions is on this series of Doug Munson. His is a very unusual combat film, as it includes air-to-air, a large number of planes being shot on the ground, plus shooting up a locomotive and other ground targets. Isn't that spectacular? Look at those pieces flying. He has to fly through. Doesn't show up yet, but he has a German plane that's trying to land before it gets shot down. There it's coming into view. I don't recall whether Doug caused that plane to crash or whether he landed before he was out of control. Jim Wilkinson was credited with shooting down 7.5 German planes before being lost 2 days before D-Day on a strafing run in England. When the steam comes out of the locomotives like that, you know that you've destroyed a lot of the boiler tubes. I edited out, seemed like quite a 20 or 30 seconds of this. Willie Mays chasing this plane, it seems like for long enough to run out of ammunition, but in a few seconds you will see one of the most spectacular shots of a German plane being shot down as he shoots the left wing off here in a few moments. Here it goes. Al Jukheim was our second leading ace with 11 air victories. An interesting statistic is that 4 of our top 7 aces were lost. A total of 11 of the 78th pilots became aces while flying with our group. They had a total of 79.5 air victories or 23% of the 338.5 total air victories for the group. I think the pilot's going to bail out of this one in a moment. There he comes. I selected these 23 mission combat films for not only being some of the most spectacular examples, but also because the original exposure was far better than normal. A lot of clarity is lost in converting this 43-year-old film to video, and much of the group combat film was far from being a good exposure when taken. Here I am. I can see I'm a major now, so it's sometime in mid-1944, and I must be out of pipe tobacco, as the only time I smoked cigarettes is when my supply of Mixture 79 was en route from the States. This is the first of my 3 P-47s, named for my daughter Vivian Gale. Gale was 2 months old when I left her and Ed in California and took a troop train to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and the Queen Elizabeth troop ship to Scotland. This plane was shot down on a mission with another pilot flying it in February of 1944. I was hit by ground fire 3 times while flying and had to leave the 2nd V Gale on an emergency field in France 2 weeks after D-Day with 2 or 3 cylinder heads shot off and leaking oil quite rapidly. The cockpit of the P-47 was very roomy. The Spitfire pilots claimed that to take evasive action in combat, the Yanks just loosened their seat belts and ran around the cockpit. I flew Spitfires for a month, and the cockpits were very cramped by comparison. The vest I'm wearing is for flotation emergencies if you found yourself in the water for whatever reason. It was dubbed a Mae West for reasons which were more obvious when it was inflated. Today I suspect it might be called a Dolly Parton. This is Bill Vickery, Assistant Crew Chief of the V-Gale, and the other man is Harold Zahn, the radio maintenance man for my flight. Note the 50 caliber gun sticking out the leading edge of the wing. And this is Sergeant John Harris, the crew chief of all three of the V-Gales. The armament man is servicing the 450 caliber guns in each wing. This was standard procedure each time the guns were fired. Ground personnel were highly competent and were dedicated to keeping their planes in perfect condition with no regard to long hours often required to get a plane in combat readiness. I took this picture of a bridge before releasing two 500-pound bombs on this skip bombing mission. I had spotted two locomotives on my approach and got the first shots at them, the first one coming up here. It was normal procedure for everybody in the flight to follow and trail on these strafing missions like this. I got hit in the windshield by ground fire while strafing this marshalling yard. The bulletproof glass in front of my face deflected the bullet out the top of the canopy. This is strafing a supply train. Another train. There's a locomotive is the target on this run. More supply trains. Still more supply trains. We'd usually work our way back along the railroad track when returning on the deck from a mission. There's a German truck trying to hide in this row of trees. You can see him moving right there. He didn't make it. He had something that was burning, made a pretty good fire. Barges also carried supplies. I would think it'd take a lot of 50 caliber bullets to do too much damage to them. This is an ME-109 on the ground, not at an airfield. He probably had to make an emergency landing. This supply train is burning pretty good. Another German vehicle. Another truck trying to hide in the trees. Note the broad pattern of the 850 caliber guns. This truck's on fire. Another truck. We had something explosive on this dive bombing mission. Less than half of my combat film turned out good enough to transfer to video because of bad underexposure.
This is George Krumme again. We've come to the end of the commentary by Bob Eby, but for those of us who are interested in Quince Brown and the Bristow connection, here are some additional comments. Quince was born in 1917. He graduated from Bristow High School and attended Bristow Junior College and Oklahoma A&M College briefly, before earning his Air Corps wings at Kelly Field on April 25, 1941, 7 months before the beginning of World War II. He served as a flight instructor at Randolph, Kelly, and Majors airfields in Texas and taught a year at the Enid Army Flying School. He then applied for operations, and after advanced training at Dale Mabry Field in Florida, in April of 1943 he joined the 78th Fighter Group at Duxford Air Base, south of London, England. The plane the group used was a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavy fighter with an unusual four-bladed propeller. The P-47s were excellent strafing fighters because they could take considerable punishment and still return home. The word strafe was coined by the Germans from their World War I slogan, Gott strafe England, that is, God punish England, and the Thunderbolt could certainly punish, strafing with 8 machine guns at up to 450 miles per hour at an altitude at times less than 100 feet above the ground. But piloting a fighter plane was dangerous, particularly while strafing. The 78th Fighter Group, with a normal flying complement of 36 to 48 planes, lost 167 of its aircraft during 2 years of action, and 93 of its pilots were killed. In this scene, you can see a pilot pull his plane up as he suddenly saw an electric line in his path. Watch carefully as he approaches the hangar, and you may be able to see the wires. Quince's crew chief told Rusty Brown that occasionally planes would come back with wire and tree branches stuck to the wings. On one occasion, Quince even returned with bent propeller tips. At 27, Quince was one of the older pilots, but was renowned for his keen eyesight and his flying skills. He was officially credited with 12 1/3 air-to-air victories and with 2 planes destroyed on the ground. After a year's service, in mid-1944, Quince came back to the States for a couple of months and led war bond drives across the nation. He returned to combat duty in August. Less than a month later, on September 6, 1944, while strafing a German airfield, Quince's plane was struck by anti-aircraft fire. Unable to continue, he parachuted and was seen to land safely, gather his parachute, and disappear into the woods. It was presumed that his name would soon appear on the prisoner of war lists, but after several fruitless months, it was determined that he had apparently been turned over to civilians, only to be executed by the local SS representative who, after the war, was identified and tried for murder. Quince flew more than 130 combat missions and was awarded the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross with 4 oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, and the French Croix de Guerre. Quince has been inducted into the Oklahoma Aviation and Space Hall of Fame and into the Oklahoma Military Hall of Fame. Moreover, the Quince L. Brown Parkway serves as the entry into the Vance Air Base at Enid, where Quince instructed air cadets for a year. Even though the war continued for 8 months after he was killed, Quince remained the leading ace of his fighter group. When the war ended, Quince's remains were eventually transferred to Bristow, where he was buried with full military honors in the family burial plots. I hope you've enjoyed this brief look backward in time.